All right. Hello, everyone. Salam, namaste, adab, and welcome to today's event. Today we have Professor Meera Nanda, a very well-known historian of science, writer and author, who is going to talk on post-colonial theory and the decolonization of the Indian mind. Basically, she is going to talk on her recent book, which is Post-Colonial Theory and the Making of Hindu Nationalism, The Wages of Unreason, Meera Nanda, published by Routledge 2025. As you see in the poster, I have put her major work, both sides on the poster. One of the, I love that title, The God Market. And there are many other very famous, books. As you know, she is a double PhD in science. Uh, First PhD is in biotechnology from IIT Delhi, and the second one is from Renessier Polytechnic Institute, which is probably in New York, Troy, or Hartford. And she has written, before the book journey, she was a fellow, John Templeton Foundation Fellow in Religion and Science for 2 years. Then she joined at JNU as a fellow. And after that, she has gone to Indian Institute of Science, Education and Research, Mohali, where she taught from 2009 to 17, and then as a visiting member in the same institute at Pune, 2019 to 2020. And post that, probably she took a retirement and now living here in the United States, not very far from us in Connecticut. And so all her major work, like postmodernism and religious fundamentalism, which is a scientific rebuttal to Hindu science, breaking the spell of dharma and other essays. There are a couple of essays, prophets facing backward, postmodern critiques of science and the Hindu nationalism in India. Essentially, I will say, I will not take much time because she needs more time to really elaborate. It is basically what you call at one point, Nehru used to proclaim that we lack scientific temper and we should build a scientific temper. And a journey after 50 years now, the Hindu right is saying that we have to go back in our medieval past to look what we produce in science, and based on that, we have to promote science. So I am not sure that where we fit in, but as a scientist, I will say that I'm always for a rational thought and for scientific temper. So let's see what Professor Meera is going to tell us. So welcome, Nandaji, and now it's your turn.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me and giving me this opportunity. I'm going to talk about I'm going to expand upon what I've written in this new book of mine, and in fact, so yeah, let me just dive right in. Yeah, the funny thing is, I've lived with these ideas for God knows how many years. It took me 3 years writing this book, but it's the first time I'm actually verbalizing it. I'm putting it in words orally, and so I'm a bit, a little nervous about it. Um, anyway, so let me uh, start by saying that uh, uh, social sciences and the humanities in the US and in India for the past 40 years, if not more, have been dominated by a left-leaning way of thinking, a left-leaning theory which calls itself post-colonial theory, which basically identifies modernity in ex-colonial countries, post-colonial societies with Eurocentrism, with colonialism. And they have argued quite strenuously for, rediscovering our indigenous ways of thinking, ways of living, and asked for decolonization of the mind. And what I'm saying is, in a nutshell, that we are decolonizing, but into a Hindu Rashtra. And so the title of my book is the thesis of the book. Okay, the title is Postcolonial Theory and the Making of Hindu Nationalism, and that I mean it literally. I argue in the book that this left-leaning theory, which equates modernity with colonialism and Eurocentrism, has actually uh, gone into the making of current phase of Hindu nationalism. So, just to warn you, I will be speaking from prepared notes, but occasionally I'll sort of take off. So you'll have to bear with me on that. So I will let me read from my prepared text. The post-colonial left and the Hindu right have become strange bedfellows. Post-colonial theory, along with its younger cousin, decolonial theory, is providing fresh ammunition and scholarly respectability to the Modi government's agenda of decolonizing the Indian mind. The shared ground between the two enemies is not limited to name dropping or to superficial appropriation of fashionable academic jargon. Rather, there is a deeper ideological convergence. The post colonial left and the Hindu right are on the same page when it comes to defending traditions against modernity and popular religiosity against secularization of the mind. They are also in complete agreement that Europe and its ideas of secularism, individualism, and objective knowledge need to be provincialized to make room for Indian alternatives. Above all, both sides rage against the continuing colonization of the Indian mind and seek ways of knowing and living that express our authentic being. Both are singing the same song with the same refrain: down with Eurocentrism, decolonize now, Swaraj in ideas. There is a deep irony here. Post-colonial and decolonial thinkers attack the universality of modern norms of reason and progress so as to let the subaltern speak, to make room for the indigenous and non-modern ways of knowing that they claimed have been silenced first by colonialism and later by the Nehruvian state, run by westernized elites with colonized minds. The Hindu nationalists are using the same post colonial arguments against Eurocentrism and colonial consciousness to install the great tradition of Vedantic Hinduism as the cultural policy of the state in all relevant fields, from science education, medicine, the law, and even international affairs. What is more, the Hindu right presents itself as the true champion of the subaltern knowledge systems. Let's say Ayurveda, astrology and panchangs, worship of sacred groves, mythic history, etc. As they claim that these popular knowledges are popular expressions of the Sanskritic great tradition. The post-colonial promise to emancipate our imaginations from the lingering after effects of colonialism is being put to work to bind us to Bharat Mata, imagined as a Hindu goddess. The subtitle of the book, The Wages of Unreason, hints at why the Hindu right finds post-colonial theory so congenial. The academic left attacked the modern norms of rationality as Eurocentric and causing epistemic violence to the worldview of the colonized. The academic left sought to provincialize Europe so that an alternative modernity could emerge that would be guided by indigenous understanding of nature, knowledge, personhood, community, and ethics. These left-leaning calls for indigenous modernity are nothing new for the Hindu right. I invite you to read the works of Swami Vivekananda, Sri Aurobindo, and Gandhi, the main architects of Indian nationalism, not of Indian nationalism, to see for yourself the close correspondence of their ideas of Hindu revival with the post-colonial calls for a non-Western modernity. I have a long chapter on Hindu revivalism, chapter 3, in which I look at the romanticist roots of revivalist and romanticist roots of Indian nationalism. And I'm talking the mainstream Indian nationalism. People make these distinctions that this is Hindu nationalism versus the good nationalism is Indian nationalism. Hindu nationalism is the bad nationalism. The two were tightly connected. The ideas that, for example, I mean, Vivekananda and Aurobindo were influential on the so-called secular nationalists like Gandhi and Nehru, as well as on Hindu nationalists. So they share a certain core ideas are shared by Hindu and Indian nationalism. Anyway, to go back to what I was saying, so what I'm saying is that the calls for an indigenous Indian modernity are already present in the revivalist discourses of Indian nationalists like Vivekananda and Gandhi and Aurobindo. So it was only natural that the RSS would welcome the calls for provincializing Europe and embrace Dipesh Chakrabarti, who's written a book with that title, as a fellow Rashtravadi. It was only natural that Narendra Modi would constantly invoke his namesake, Narendra Datta, aka Vivekananda, to replace Eurocentrism with Vedacentrism in the name of ending Gulami ki Mansikta. One could say that Modi government's obsession with decolonization of the Indian mind is nothing but the wages or the payment for all the theoretical work the academic left has done in dismantling the universal claims of reason. What ivory tower intellectuals theorized, Hindutva's Bodhik Kshatriyas are putting into practice. If this is all that my book was saying, my job today would have been very simple. I could state my thesis of strange bedfellows, like I've tried to do it just now, and I could have followed it up with a few examples from the fourth chapter of my book, in which I closely examine the writings of four major Hindutva intellectuals, starting with Colonel Elst, Bal Gangadhara of Ghent School, the Rajiv Malhotra, and J.S.I. Deepak. So I could have just done that, stated my thesis, given you the examples from their writings, and case closed. I could cite their work to show how they see themselves as heirs of Edward Said, Walter Mignolo, Dipesh Chakrabarti, and Ashish Nandi, and how they use Gayatri Spivak's strategic essentialism to take whatever they want from postcolonial theory by labeling it as Eurocentric and Marxist. I could also give you examples of the unacknowledged presence of a Hindu and a Puranic sensibilities in the writings of postcolonial theorists, especially Ashish Nandi, Dipesh Chakrabarti, and Aditya Nigam. I could do all this in about 15 minutes, and then we could all go back and enjoy our weekend. That would have been the easy route for me, but I'm taking a slightly more complicated path in this talk. I want to place the post-colonial characterization of modernity as mental colonialism in a larger context. There are two issues of this larger context that I want to discuss with you. The first has to do with the cultural despair of the intellectuals. This will connect the post-colonial theory to postmodernism on the one hand, and to the idea of a conservative revolution against the revolution on the other. The second has to do with the nature of Indian nationalism. Was Indian nationalism as derivative discourse of colonialism because it accepted the Enlightenment ideals of modernity and scientific rationality, as Ashish Nandi and Partha Chatterjee have argued? Or was Indian nationalism a Hindu revivalist project that was inspired by anti-Enlightenment, anti-modernist European intellectual currents like Romanticism and Theosophy? How we understand the history of Indian nationalism and the nature of the Nehruvian state that emerged after colonialism matters a great deal. Those who see Nehruvian state as infected with an Enlightenment mindset inherited from colonialism would champion decolonization and indigenization. Those who see nationalism and the nation state as harboring revivalist tendencies will champion secularism and a deeper secularization. So let us start with the cultural despair of the intellectuals. Cultural despair describes a sense of profound pessimism and hopelessness regarding the state of modern culture, technology, and society, often fueled by a feeling of alienation and the fear that the traditional values are eroding. Fritz Stern, a historian of Nazism, first used this phrase in his book, The Politics of Cultural Despair, to describe a pathological form of cultural criticism of modernity by Germany's best known public intellectuals who ended up preparing the ground for Nazism. What makes cultural despair pathological is this: the critics astutely and correctly point out real problems in the modern world, especially in the times of transition from an agrarian to an industrial society. But instead of finding solutions through enlightened social policies, they decry the very idea of progress and the Enlightenment rationality that created the modern world. They cease being critics and become prophets who look for national rebirth, make Germany, make America, make India great again, by looking for solutions to the despised present in an idealized past. Their radical and total critique of the foundations of modernity is what leads to a conservative revolution against the revolutions that were brought about by liberalism and in some places by Marxism. Now, in fact, I would say this phenomenon of conservative revolution is not just a one-time thing that happened in Germany that Fritz Stern talks about, but it's happening even today, right now in America. The point is that instead of correcting the problems of American liberalism, MAGA people are out to just smash it and go back to some idealized America that existed only in their heads. So the idea is to just sort of a total critique of the present and looking for solutions in the past. So that's what's going on in the US currently, and is going on in India also. But I will come back to this issue of conservative revolution in the Weimar period because it has great parallels with what's happening in India. I'll come back to that later. I argue in my book that the emergency that lasted from 1975 to 1977 unleashed a wave of cultural despair amongst left-leaning intellectuals and social movements that eventually culminated in postcolonial theory. The emergency was a watershed movement for both the left and the right for different reasons. The RSS emerged energized because its participation in JP's movement, Jayaprakash Narayan's movement for total revolution, made it respectable again. The non-Marxist left, on the other hand, went into a spiral of cultural despair over the very idea of modernity. Led by Ashish Nandi and his colleagues in CSDS, that is Center for Study of Developing Societies in Delhi, the very foundations of modernity, modern science, state secularism, secularization through cultivation of popular scientific culture, the possibility of progress through modernization of the economy, were all decried as state-sponsored vandalism that were destroying the innocence and the wholesomeness of non-modern India. The subaltern studies group of Marxist historians would also be touched by this anti-modernist turn and would end up celebrating the non-modern peasant consciousness over the elitism of nationalist historians. The explicitly and stridently anti-modernist, anti-secularist writings of Nandi and his colleagues at CSDS that began appearing in the 1980s would eventually merge with the postmodernist and deconstructionist critiques of Orientalism by Edward Said and Gayatri Spivak in the US. So the synthesis of Indian anti-modernism, and Euro-American postmodernism is what gave us this thing called postcolonial, that goes by postcolonial theory today. So there were really two almost simultaneous beginnings, one in America when Edward Said published his famous book, and the other, that book came out in 1979. Nandi's output started picking up pace in late 80s. In his major book, The Intimate Enemy, comes out in 1983. And Nandi's ideas became important because he wasn't just a lone intellectual just sitting in his study and doing, producing these things. His ideas became the ruling ideas of the new social movements for environmental protection, for peasants' rights, for women's rights. So these were the non-Marxist issue-based movements. So they took on this idea of recovering the indigenous local knowledges quite seriously. And once the academics from India, as the American university system was expanding, it was still in a liberal phase. Multiculturalism was going strong. In 80s, 90s, Indian academics made America their home, like I did. I came here in 1985. So their own discomfort with the direction of Indian modernity joined with the postmodernist currents in the U.S. American academy, and in other parts of Europe as well, the UK and Europe, but primarily America was more conducive to this kind of relativist culturalism that took hold of the academia. Now it's time to give formal definitions of postmodernism and postcolonialism. Postmodernism itself is a product of cultural despair that took over intellectuals in Europe and America after the student revolts in 1968 in Paris, and in the US after the Vietnam War. And the students were rebelling over the failure of socialist movements to deliver the promise of a better world. The distinguishing features of postmodernism is that it's suspicious of all totalities, all universal values, and grand historical narratives in favor of cultural pluralism and relativism. I'll quote my dear old friend Alan Sokal, who has a pretty good description of what postmodernism is all about. He says postmodernism is an intellectual current characterized by more or less explicit rejection of the intellectual intellectual current characterized by an explicit rejection of rationalist traditions of the Enlightenment and by a cognitive and cultural relativism that regards modern science as nothing more than a narration, a myth, or a social construct. The marriage of postmodern relativism with concerns about legacy of colonialism, sparked by Edward Said's book and the writings of Indian critics of modernity, gave us postcolonial theory. There's no founding statement of postcolonial theory and no agreement over what it stands for. In my reading of the Indian literature, I've identified the following guiding themes. First, beyond economic and political injustice, colonialism committed another kind of injustice, namely epistemic injustice, that results in mutilating and silencing the worldview of the colonized people. Beyond the crime of imperialism, there is even a bigger crime of imperialism of categories, of conceptual categories. That is, replacing the conceptual categories through which people understand themselves with conceptual categories of an alien and a colonizing power. This is largely, the thesis of started with Nandi's Intimate Enemy, but it's taken as a basic fundamental assumption of postcolonial theory. Second, epistemic injustice did not end with the formal end of colonialism. Colonialism has an afterlife in India because Indian elites, be they secular liberals, Marxists, or even Hindu nationalists, continue to do what colonial powers used to do, namely judge the folkways of the ordinary people against Western norms. Liberals and Marxists try to reform the subaltern consciousness through inculcation of scientific rationality, while Hindu nationalists Semitize and scientize Hinduism and distort its fluid and tolerant spirit. So basically, it amounts to saying that scientific temper or secularization, any attempt to question the existing popular worldview, amounts to a colonial imposition. Third, the non-elite masses, the subaltern, have a mental and a moral landscape that is independent of the westernized, secularist, and self-orientalized Hindu elites. In the subaltern minds, the gods are real. Puranic myths are more meaningful than the history as told by historians. And the understanding of the natural world has fuzzy edges that are not demarcated from moral values or from the Shakti of gods and goddesses. In the subaltern world, community counts more than utilitarian calculations of money making and competition. Living with nature counts more than productivity and efficiency. The tolerance of difference is the norm. To think that the subaltern view of the world is merely a leftover or a pre-modern survival, and to expect Indians to become more secular and utilitarian as the country modernizes, is to remain imprisoned in a Eurocentric mindset that sees the West as an end of all history and the goal of all development. So this is largely the thesis of Dipesh Chakravarti, and now carried on by Aditya Nigam in his work on decolonizing social theory. So the idea is India to expect that Indians will, that there will be more secularization in India as India modernizes, is to fall into a Western mindset. This is to fit India into a colonial story of modernity. Fourth, the recovery of subaltern values is necessary to throw off the yoke of Eurocentrism from our minds and academic theories. The subaltern life world must become a living option if we want to feel at home in our modernity, rather than forever exist as consumers of imported ideas. It is therefore necessary to provincialize Europe so that the shoots of an alternative indigenous modernity can have a chance to grow. So I want to underline two features of these axioms. One, Hindutva intellectuals whose writings I have examined in detail in the 4th chapter of my book are in total agreement with these axioms. They take these theses of postcolonial theory as the starting point for their abhorrently Islamophobic and reactionary ideas. The only modification they make is that they insist, and correctly, that the subaltern consciousness is dharmic consciousness, and that they, and not the liberals, are the two spokespeople for the masses. Secondly, there is no room in these theses of postcolonialism for a rational critique of the subaltern and or dharmic consciousness. By postcolonial logic, anyone who believes that Hindu metaphysics and customs need to be revised in the light of modern science has a colonized mind because she accepts the Enlightenment meta-narratives about universality of human reason, of scientific reason. By postcolonial logic, all standards of evidence, all criteria of demarcating rational from irrational, truth from falsehood, and even what is taken as real, are internal to the culture, are internal to the culture's episteme. And India has its own episteme distinct from the West. Rationalists like the Bolkar, Ambedkar, and Periyar, and countless others who challenge the claims of the inherited tradition are doing violence to this Indic episteme. In fact, if you think about it, those people who killed the Bolkar, I forget the name of the son, it's some organization based in Goa and quite active in Maharashtra. That is the reason they gave for justifying what they did in murdering the Bolkar, that he was hurting Hindu sensibilities. His 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 campaign, lifelong campaign against superstitions, was hurting Hindu sensibilities. Post-colonial theorists would end up. That's what they're saying. That anybody who accepts who challenges the subaltern worldview is is a is inauthentic and colonized. So, okay, to conclude this part of about cultural despair, I want to draw a parallel between post-colonialism and the conservative revolution in the Weimar Republic. The Weimar Republic was the first constitutional republic in Germany's history. It was born in 1918 after the First World War and died in 1933 when Hitler assumed emergency powers. Germany at that time was experiencing conditions very similar to India in the mid 20th century. The country was going through rapid but uneven industrialization and urbanization, uprooting traditional communities. And like India, Germany had a very weak tradition of liberalism. The Weimar Constitution was the country's first experience with liberal democracy. Under these unsettling conditions, a number of prominent German intellectuals, including such well-known names as Oswald Spengler, Moller van der Broek, Ernst Junger, Thomas Mann, Carl Schmitt, Martin Heidegger, experienced a sense of cultural despair and rejected the Enlightenment rationalism, liberalism, and Marxist socialism, and parliamentary democracy as alien ideas that were contrary to the culture of the German people. Their argument in the defense of Germanic soul against the soulless and materialistic French and British were embraced by the Nazis. Cultural despair of the intellectuals gave ideological ammunition to Nazism. Weimar's conservative revolution is the best known example of anti-enlightenment and nativist ideology bringing down a fledgling democracy and holds lessons for India. India is having its Weimar movement when ideologues from both the left and the right espousing the same anti-modernist indigenous ideas made fashionable by post-colonial theory are endangering the already fragile secular democratic order of the country. Let me now briefly turn to the second big theme that I mentioned earlier, and that is the nature of Indian nationalism. Post-colonial and subaltern historians have turned a critical eye to the anti-colonial nationalist movement, which they blame for its failure to value the contributions of peasants and tribals. They basically say it's an elitist movement, again, mentally colonized and failed to appreciate the peasant consciousness. This critique is the theme of Partha Chatterjee's well-known work titled Nationalist Thought and the Colonial World, a Derivative Discourse. The book was published in 1986 and is considered a classic of post-colonial thought. And these ideas sell very well in the US, who just read this book without reading anything else about Indian nationalist movements. So they grab onto it as a representative of the crimes of colonialism in third world countries, that sort of a thing. But it has an extremely problematic thesis, in my opinion. Chatterjee argues that Indian nationalism started from Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, passing through Gandhi and ending with Nehru, was an inauthentic second-hand copy or a derivative discourse of our colonial masters, because it accepted the Enlightenment paradigm of modern science as universally valid. Chatterjee's point is that while anti-colonial nationalists rejected the negative colonial stereotypes of Indian people, they still wanted to prove that Indians could be modern. And I'm quoting Chatterjee here. In agreeing to be modern, nationalist thought accepted the universality of modern frame of knowledge. He criticizes Bankim for turning God Krishna into a Semitic or hard god and for looking for science in Hindu spirituality. But his real target is Nehru, who he condemns for embracing the spirit of the age that celebrated scientific temper, industry, and progress, and giving us a nation state that he blames Nehru for then giving us a nation state that was elitist and insensitive to the consciousness of the masses. Only Gandhi comes through as as the saint. He is admired for not succumbing to the charms of the modern world. Now, this is a breathtaking claim. To accept that modern science is an advance over pre-modern knowledge traditions amounts to being mentally colonized. That's what he's saying. Uh, it rules out the possibility that the colonial and post-colonial intellectuals could embrace modern science because they found the scientific method rationally more persuasive. It falls back to the old stereotypes that the West is rational and the East is spiritual. Moreover, it follows from Chatterjee's logic that to be truly free of colonialism, India must get rid of post-colonial, post-enlightenment thematic and rediscover its own ways of knowing. And actually, Chatterjee argues exactly that in his many essays, especially the essay on our modernity. Authentic modernity will come only when we get rid of, when we challenge the intimate enemy in our heads. This reading of anti-colonial nationalism as a prisoner of scientific rationality not only leads to startlingly reactionary conclusions, it is patently false. As I show in my close readings of the writings of two of India's most celebrated nationalists, Swami Vivekananda and Sri Aurobindo, what they borrowed from the West was not the much derided Enlightenment rationalism, but anti-Enlightenment romanticism. India's entanglement with romanticism, especially German romanticism, is a very complex issue, and uh, you know, and it'll take at least 2 hours to fully, describe the whole development, which I do in the book. But I'm just going to briefly try to tell you the story. Um, very briefly, starting in the late 18th century, German romantics, named especially important well-known intellectuals like Herder, Schlegel brothers, Goethe, Nietzsche, and later Max Muller, they were troubled. They were troubled by the beginnings of the modern age in their country, in their society, and Germans have always had a big problem with the French, and the French Enlightenment ideas were troubling them. Because they considered French ideas to be destabilizing and alien. They were alien imports, just like we consider Western ideas to be Eurocentric. They were reacting quite negatively to the Enlightenment that had started in France and England. So in the late 18th century, the German anti-modernist discovered the Hindu classics, which were being at that time just being translated by William Jones and Charles Wilkins, and various other British Orientalists were translating Shakuntala, the Bhagavad Gita, the laws of Manu had recently been translated, and Germans had access to them. They translated them right away into German, and they became great admirers of Indian texts. And this was also the time when William Jones had proposed the hypothesis of a shared Indo-European heritage because of the connections between Sanskrit and European languages. So this Indo-European heritage was later, especially by Max Muller, interpreted as an Aryan heritage, shared Aryan heritage. And Germany was looking for its identity. It wasn't very sure of where it belonged in the scheme of things in Europe. So it clutched on to Aryan identity. And we know what happened with that. So the deeply anti-modernist, why were they, this is the important thing. Why were they attracted to India? The Romanticists were fascinated by ancient India because it offered an antidote to rationalism and materialism, individualism and egalitarianism, which they objected to in the Enlightenment ideas. So Indian classics were providing them with counter to the French Enlightenment ideas. This fascination with India, okay, so what happened, what I'm suggesting is, and I argue in the book, is when Indians began to define themselves as a nation, it is to these German and other European romantics that they turned to. The same stock of ideas that had attracted the German folkish nationalists to India, organic unity between spirit and matter, rooted and hierarchically ordered communities, and the excellence of the Aryan language and culture, became the basis of nationalist claims for superiority over the materialist commercial culture of the British. I'll just make two remarks here if you just as just a rough check of where they are coming from, look at the references they quote, look at the references Gandhi quotes, look at the adoration Vivekanand has for the German romantics of his age, especially Max Muller, Paul Deussen. It is clear whose ideas were inspiring Indian nationalists. And I invite you to read Vivekanand closely. You will see his adulation of India as an Aryan culture, as a cousin of Greeks who were superior to the Greek branch of, the brotherhood of Aryans, but Indian Aryans were superior to the Greek Aryans, who then, so he read Vivekanand seriously, and you will see that it is as far away from an Enlightenment rationalist agenda as it can be. He celebrates Aryan culture. He defends the caste, the idea of caste as a communitarian alternative to the competitive individualism of the West. He celebrates Indian spirituality as scientific without being reductionist. So these wild claims that Indian modernity and Indian nationalism is infected with colonialism and its sort of Enlightenment mindset is just false on facts. So I'm saying that post-colonial theorists misread Indian nationalism and post-colonial state by equating the colonial legacy solely with Enlightenment modernism and turning a blind eye to the romanticist episteme that was also a part of the colonial legacy. Moreover, post-colonialists assume that the nationalist thinker were blank slates on which colonial powers could imprint their ideas. A more careful reading will show that neo-Hindu nationalists like Bankim and Vivekanand argued more like traditional pundits than as scientific rationalists. They used the traditional Hindu art of argumentation using analogies, or what they call bandhus, and correspondences between macro and microcosm, and looked for concordances of any new idea with the Vedas. To claim that they were colonized in their minds because of their modernity is a misreading that would be funny if it were not so dangerous. Far from fitting India into a Procrustean bed of Western ideas, Indian rationalists were Sanskritizing Western ideas and turning them into weapons against the West. It is true that Vivekananda, Aurobindo, and their predecessors and their followers spoke of modern science and technology and freedom and democracy with much admiration. But what they did with these ideas is another matter altogether. What the founding fathers of Indian nationalism talked, when the founding fathers of Indian nationalism talked of science, they emptied it of its spirit of fact-finding empiricism and replaced it with Vedantic mysticism, which is entirely beyond empirical verification. While they talked of democracy, they emptied it of the rights of the individual whom they could only see as members of a caste or a religious community. While they talked of freedom, they emptied it of the freedom of individuals to pursue their lives without external restraints and replaced it with self-restraint and fulfillment of dharma. While they talked of nation, they emptied it of its civil character and turned it into an organism-like collective of those who shared the Hindu soul of India. Like the German conservative revolutionaries who converted usable parts of modern civilization into German culture, Indian conservative revolutionaries kept the words democracy, science, reason, while encapsulating them in starkly illiberal and mystical webs of meaning derived from Hindu spirituality, which they took to be the everlasting, timeless soul of India. Far from being colonized by the West, the pioneers of Indian nationalism were plundering, as Aurobindo calls it, the intellectual resources of the West to assert Hindu superiority over the fallen West, over this materialistic, spiritually starved, godless West. This is hardly a picture of colonial subjugation of the Indian mind. If anything, it is a case of subjugation of the West by nationalist intellectuals for India's aggrandization. If you ever wondered where Modi gets his wild ideas about India being the Vishwaguru, the ancient Indians knowing all the modern sciences, and India being the mother of democracy, all these ideas are all there in the writings of the pioneers of Indian nationalism. So to suggest that India is colonized and a victim of Eurocentric ideas of modernity is really totally untenable. It's a joke, and it and it has ruled the academic common sense for a long time. Let me conclude. I have argued that post-colonial theory's equation of modernity with colonialism has played into Hindu nationalism. I'm not suggesting that post-colonial left single-handedly lit the fires of Hindu chauvinism. What I'm claiming is that it has enabled the fire to spread by disabling a principled critique of Hinduism and Hindu nationalism that could have acted as a fire retardant. By recklessly propagating the cult of indigeneity, the high priest of post-colonial theory have succeeded in tilting the intellectual center of gravity towards the politics of nostalgia and revival, which is the natural terrain of the Hindu right. Consequently, there is now a void where there should have been a strong, principled, secular democratic front against Hindutva's onslaught on all that was once decent and promising about the idea of India. I will stop here.
Wonderful, wonderful talk. Let us invite Dr. Ravi Sinha for the concluding remarks, and after that we will have question and answer. Before I let him speak, let me introduce him, though he hardly needs an introduction on this forum. He is a regular visitor. Nonetheless, Dr. Ravi Sinha is a physicist, a writer, an activist, scholar. He did his PhD in physics from MIT, and he did his research also in the University of Maryland as a physicist, and later at Physical Research Laboratory, India, and also taught at Gujarat University, Ahmedabad. After that, he decided that he should put full time in his activism and lecture on science, rationality, and other things that dear to him. So they initiated a new socialist initiative. He is a founding member and authored A Globalization of Capital in 1996. And so welcome, Dr. Ravi Sinha.
Thank you, Raji Sahab, and thank you, Meera ji, for a wonderful talk. Someone had to have the courage to say that the intellectual emperors wearing the fine clothes of verbiage are actually naked. Professor Nanda is one of the boldest critics of intellectual charlatans, and I have long been an admirer of her forthrightness and erudition. She is in the league of Alan Sokal, Richard Dawkins, Stephen Weinberg, and others who have been tireless defenders of science, reason, and enlightenment. But she has done something more. She has also drawn our attention to some nasty and dangerous characters donning the garbs of tradition, community, and designer superstition. Some 2 decades ago, while taking on the postmodernist critics of science in her book Prophets Facing Backwards, she exposed their relationship with the Hindutva kind of nationalism and fascism. Now in her new book, she not only takes on the intellectual obscurantists of the post-colonial kind, she also exposes their affinity and connection with the same right-wing branch of conservative revolutionaries, as she calls them. I cannot agree more with Professor Nanda when she differentiates between the economic and political injustice inflicted by colonialism on the colonized on the one hand, and the so-called epistemic violence supposedly done to the traditional knowledge systems of the colonized on the other. The disease of conflating modernity with capitalism is not confined to the conservative revolutionaries. Many in the mainstream of progressive left show at times similar symptoms. Because modernity and capitalism were born as twins, the crimes of capitalism are often ascribed to modernity. For example, many stalwart intellectuals from the progressive left often underline that fascism is a thoroughly modern phenomenon. This statement is obviously true in the chronological sense. It is also true in the substantive sense that capitalism too is a modern phenomenon and fascism can be shown to arise often under the conditions of capitalist crises. But the statement that fascism is a modern phenomenon can also be construed as if modernity is implicated in the rise of fascism. This kind of confusion is quite widespread. Many on the left consider modernity nothing more than a superstructural feature or an ideological tool of capitalism. This is like throwing the baby with the bathwater. If seeds of modernity, whichever way it is defined, began to sprout in the 16th and 17th century Europe, it can hardly be seen as a harvest of capitalism. In any case, by the time capitalism came in a position to employ in its service a truncated and deformed version of modernity, the world was already into the 19th century. If one tries too hard to derive from capitalism everything else that happened in Europe during those centuries, it will require too much of a theoretical gymnastics. Far more plausible is the thesis that something else too during those centuries that was as important and as powerful as capitalism was also happening. This can be comprehended as a constellation of major developments, such as separation of modern philosophy from the theological roots during the 16th and 17th century, the advent of scientific revolution in the 17th century, and the emergence and consolidation of the cognitive, cultural, normative, and political values of the 18th century Enlightenment. All these put together, something that can represent something that can be defined as essence and universal features of modernity. Seeds of modernity can be separated from its European harvest, and these seeds can be planted anywhere. Harvests of modernity will be different in different cultures and civilizations. Prophets of postcolonialism are causing harm to the erstwhile colonies by depicting modernity as epistemic violence and cultural warfare of the Western hegemon. But I should not spend all of the few minutes I have in paraphrasing Professor Nanda. I cannot do better than what she does, and I cannot add anything new to what she has to say. Instead, let me flag 2 or 3 questions or challenges for all of us that follow from her acute observations and powerful arguments. I am sure she has thought about them, but it would still be useful, hopefully, to bring them back on the table. First, why have the Hindutva fascists been so successful in India? Professor Nanda is absolutely right when she clarifies that she does not attribute their success solely to the intellectual enterprise of the post-colonial ideologues and theorists. She does not attribute to these intellectuals much causal or political force in the actual arena of history. Instead, she focuses on the subterranean currents that flow from them to the Hindutva fascist. If we take the example of the Nazis, Nietzsche and Heidegger by themselves could not have driven Germans to madness. Hitler grabbed power in 1933 thanks to many factors. Germans had not yet gone mad the way they did by the end of that decade. Why did they succumb to the charms of Hitler when they did? Many would shrug it off by saying that it happens, especially in the conditions of economic crisis or national humiliation. Of course, things happen, but they need to be understood too. An honest and objective understanding of a large political phenomenon, such as the Indian variety of fascism, should not entirely ignore the contribution of the cultural or social soil. Layers of this soil get deposited over centuries or millennia, and not much can be done to it in the short run. But that does not mean we should not decipher its role in the political arena. Have we, for example, understood the sources of the colossal people-to-people violence at the time of partition? The major political forces, the British, the Congress, and the Muslim League, can be held responsible in varying degrees for the partition itself. But none of them were actively organizing the violence in the way brown shirts of the Hindutva brigade do. And yet, the largest and the most intense form of people-to-people violence in the history of this land did happen. People on the subcontinent are, in some ways, still living in the aftermath of that violence. Second, and more fundamentally, why are humans so susceptible to unreason? While concluding her latest book, Professor Nanda directed our attention to the Chomsky-Foucault debate and to Chomsky's book, What Kind of Creatures Are We? I admire Chomsky for many things, and I am also in sympathy with his insistence on the substantive and universal aspects of human nature. Without knowing the technical details, I can appreciate the argument that our cognitive and linguistic abilities, including that of rationality, may have something to do with the biological endowments of our species. Humans are definitely rational animals. But it is also true at the same time that humans are unique in being irrational too. One does not know if irrational horses or superstitious elephants exist. Where does the ubiquitous irrationality of humans come from? Even more pressing is the need to understand the reasons behind the cultural and civilizational diversity. It is true that universality of human reason does not imply homogeneity of human culture. Universality of any kind expresses itself always in the form of actually existing particularity. The postmodern and the post-colonial thinkers have a tendency to accord fundamental status to particularity, diversity, and difference. But we, on the other hand, should not stop at distilling or identifying universality underneath diversity. We must understand the sources of diversity of cultures as they are implicated in the political processes, including those that give rise to fascism and to conservative revolutions in general. Finally, what is to be done about Hindutva fascism and about conservative counter-revolutions? I know that Professor Nanda is focusing on the fundamentally anti-modern, even farcical and dangerous aspects of the post-colonial project of, in quotes, decolonizing the mind. Hers is a much needed intervention, and I am fully with her in this endeavor. She does not have to formulate at one go a comprehensive strategy to combat Hindutva. But as I said, I am using this opportunity to flag certain tasks and challenges that naturally arise from her insights and arguments. Along with the cognitive unity of humankind, a la Chomsky, she also appeals to the moral unity of humankind, a la Amartya Sen and Martha Nussbaum. I am with her in this too. And yet the challenge remains how to actualize the ethical universality. Given the diversity of actually existing cultures and civilizations, the processes and struggles aimed at actualizing the moral unity of humankind will take diverse forms in different societies. One has to ask, why do the universal value of enlightenment and modernity appear to have run into rough weather more or less across the globe? Why has the secular liberal democracy, with its universalist agenda, suffered so many defeats at the hands of anti-modernist and fascistic populist political forces? Let me conclude with one last observation. Civilizational discourse has been monopolized by the conservative counter-revolutionaries. The liberals and the left have yielded this space to them. It is taken for granted that appeals to civilizational glory are antithetical to secular liberal humanism and modernity. They can only lead to traditionalism, majoritarianism, authoritarianism, and fascism. It is often forgotten that the idea of civilization is not the sum total of everything that actually happened in history. Unlike the mythological imaginary deployed by Hindutva in its project of Hindu Rashtra, civilization can also be a historical imaginary to be deployed in the political mobilization along modernist and progressive axes. Idea of civilization is always a construction. The difference comes from whether you construct it on the basis of select cultural, intellectual, historical accomplishment of a people, or on the basis of their mythological beliefs and religious identities. The difference also comes from what kind of political project the idea of civilization is deployed into. When the Chinese leaders, for example, deploy the idea of a unique Chinese civilization into their project of building Chinese prosperity and greatness, should it be seen merely as a ploy of authoritarian rulers? Should one not decipher the role of this discourse has played in bringing about the Chinese miracle? So I will just stop here after raising a few questions, even though there shouldn't be any doubt that I am entirely in agreement with Meeraji's project, her interventions. As I said, I am a long-term admirer of her courage and her work, but I think that the discussions will be facilitated if we raise some issues that need further consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Ravi Saab. Very enlightening. And before we go to question and answer session, we have some announcements. There won't be a session coming Saturday due to our local Aligarh Alumni Association's Golden Jubilee celebrations. So locally, if somebody is here, they should join that Saturday with multiple functions. So sorry, we will not have a session. But after that, the next announcement is when we resume, we are going to have Zara Chaudhary, a very young writer who is quite now getting acknowledged with her one first book, which is The Lucky Ones. So the title is From Witness to Voice. This is regarding the Gujarat riot and how a Muslim girl faces and observes all those what is there. So stay tuned to that. And now over to Dr. Rafat Hussain for moderating the question and answer session. Rafat.
Thank you, Dr. Raziuddin. And thank you, all three speakers. Wonderful talk, learned a lot. And thank you, Professor Nanda, Professor or Dr. Ravi Sinha, and our own Dr. Raziuddin. Thank you so much, all three. And let's begin the question and answer session. So there are two options. You can raise your digital hand, much easier, or you can write or show your interest in the chat box. So let's begin with, before I begin with, I know that Professor Romila Thapar is in the audience, and it would be nice if she has any comment or a question. So let's begin with Professor Thapar. Is that okay, Professor Thapar? I am putting you on the spot, but it would be lovely to listen from you.
I think she left.
She left?
Probably.
Yeah, I don't see her.
Probably she knew that we are going to.
Okay, no problem. So let's begin with the chat. And VS Sridhar. So, was there no such thing as epistemic violence where many intellectual and cultural elements that are relevant to sustainable living were also dismissed as non-modern? जी मीरा जी, Professor Nanda.
I'm not sure I understand the question. The question is, were there?
Was there?
Yeah, that we ignored indigenous practices. Is that not epistemic violence? Is that
right? That's what.
Yeah. No, the point is that human beings, and especially in an old society like ours, have of course found ways to live as harmoniously as possible with the material world, with each other. I mean, we wouldn't have survived as a society if we were not if we didn't have some ways of empirically coping with the world. And these ways of course need to be, if they need to be carried along into scientific rationalism. Doesn't mean that only facts. Human beings are more than just facts. There are traditions which bring joy, which bring harmony. They can come along with reason. I mean, the reason doesn't exclude a lot of practices, but if the practices are based upon patently falsified ideas which belong to the dustbin of history, scientifically speaking, that is a different question. Then you must, even if some practice is ostensibly quite, let's say, जैसे पंजाब में ये होता था, लड़कियों की पूजा करते हैं छोटे होते. One can say, what's the problem with it? ये तो अच्छा है, लड़कियों की कभी तो लड़कियों की भी पूजा होती है. One could. So my point is, what stance one takes with regard to those kind of practices which have a certain religious, metaphysical component, but are also pleasant to participate in. And most modern people participate in it because they are pleasant, without wondering about, what is being celebrated. इसके लिए I think there is no clear-cut answer. One has to be nuanced about it and take along whatever is sensible. But if the claim is, as it is from the ethnoscience people, that these practices have a certain metaphysics and a certain sort of way of thinking, knowing, all of the background assumptions should be accepted as well. And that is not acceptable to me. One can respect something and still hold it to criticism for its for the reasons behind it. And that's how traditions change. They take they can take they can be dropped altogether or take a different form. Or Karwa Chauth, for example, I mean, this to me is a personal thing, But Karwa Chauth, my mother used to be pretty religious and Karwa Chauth types. Then 1968, man reached moon. My mother was just fascinated by that human beings can. So what God is she praying to? That became like a big question for her. कि मैं क्यों पूजा कर रही हूँ? ये तो मट्टी का बना है चांद. The USIS had brought the moon rocks to Chandigarh, where I grew up. वो display कर रहे थे, US अपनी propaganda कर रहा था, which is good. I mean, there's one good. My mother took us all to see the moon rock. After that, that woman never prayed. My point is factual clarity. When the rituals depend upon certain, in the background, there are certain accepted beliefs. And once these beliefs are put in doubt, practice falls away. Or practice takes on a different meaning or completely withers away. But in India, that critique of the background assumptions behind many pleasant rituals, that critique has not gone forward. I mean, Nehru, I admired that man, but at the same time, there are real failings. I mean, if a country could not educate its children, primary education, what kind of scientific temper हम क्या बात कर रहे हैं?
Thank you, Professor Nanda. We got it.
Sorry, मैं लंबी बात हो गई. Sorry.
Yeah, because there are so many.
Sorry, मैं ज़्यादा ही बोल रही. हाँ जी.
And thank you so much. I'm sorry, there is one more question from Sridhara. Due to the interest of time, I'm not taking that question. Time permitting, I will come back. Another one is from Virinici Vivinci. In today's world of global digital capitalism, through university publications, citations, economies, AI-driven algorithm, visibility, and social media, does the discourse of epistemological cognitive decolonization paradoxically become more colonial, generating a rebound of cultural despair that fuels nationalism and religious revivalism? Long, complicated question. Virinici Saab, if you want, you can come and ask the question yourself if you want to make anything clarification. Otherwise, this question is again on the epistemological.
Yeah, I'm very sorry for the long question and confusing question. Yeah, sorry. My question is like, I have an idea now. Like now what we are going through is like digital capitalism, like where we every day, whatever the discourse that is happening today, the world is of because totally capitalistic world, even that is digitalized. So we have university publications in favor of that, citation economics, AI driven algorithmic visibility, and social media. So if one in this situation, if anyone having a discourse on epistemological decolonization process, what I feel is that paradoxically becomes more colonial because they has to go through all these phenomena of publications and they have to take the citations from the so-called approved economic theories of modern era. These all are things they have to go. So the more they are trying to talk about the decolonization, epistemological cognitive decolonization, paradoxically they have to go through this process. So I think what happens here is like this in turn reverberates in the form of more a rebound cultural despair, that what Madam has saying, and that fuels the nationalism and revivalism, religious revivalism. Is that the thing happening now?
Okay, so ask the question. What is your question, please?
No. My problem with the way you formulated the question is that you're calling a certain structure of epistemic structure. There are institutions, there are journals, there are peer reviews. That's a normal process of academic work, which is now global. Usko colonial कहने से, what is to be gained by calling it colonial? By now, in fact, with electronic digital communication, the chances of it becoming more open and democratic and more accessible to people, to us in India and elsewhere, it's more democratic. Why call it colonial is not clear to me.
Thank you. So I request the people who are asking the question, please be brief, and same request goes to our honorable speakers, because there are so many questions are lined up and I have to go through all of them, and these are unfortunately very long questions. So the next one is from Malati Phala. Thank you very much, ma'am, for this session. I have a generic question. Since the German Romanticism was against modernity and also the capitalism, does German Romanticism was based on the theory that the capitalism is the reason for the modernity, and German Romantics idealized a past which according to them was more humane. Now in India, people are becoming fanatic about going back to the roots and glorifying the past. But isn't that the modernity has more humanism? What can be done to fight this Indian romanticism as it opposes modernity without any problem with capitalism, which is the need for the hour to encourage gender equality, fight casteism? So long question, please be brief and go ahead, Professor
I think
Nanda.
Ravi's answer, Ravi was saying that to conflate any sort of realm of ideas, to conflate it only with capitalism is a mistake. There are different sources of cultural change. Economics does affect it, of course, but it's not the sum total. It's not the only, like scientific revolution, one can say, it's wrong to assume that it was capitalist needs that led to it. It was the Renaissance, the Reformation, whole bunch of ideas played into the emergence of modern science. But this question of the Romantics were not only the German Romantics, the late 18th century is when they began in earnest. Like 1780s, 90s is at that time the Enlightenment ideology was getting, because of Napoleonic wars, Germans were influenced by French ideas. So they were reacting to the very idea, because they feared the loss of religious faith, godlessness, and displacement of of communities, uprooting of communities, which hadn't become a material phenomena that it would become in the 19th century and early 20th century when fascism actually comes. That's when industrialization and uneven industrialization had rapidly taken off after unification of Germany. So my point is, Romantics were not just responding to market forces, but to also to change in the intellectual climate that they knew was possible, because the French had just carried out a revolution. So there, and it's very interesting. At that time, Kant was talking of enlightenment, and in fact, this is the funny thing. Most Romantics start as rationalists and then get sort of something happens. Either they get frustrated in their careers, or that's what happened in the case of German Romantics. Quite a few of them. Herder was a theologian. He was trained as a priest and had problems in the Enlightenment regime of at that time. I forget the name of the king at that time.
Thank you.
So etc. So yeah, it's a complicated answer to a difficult question, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for attempting that. And let's pick up someone from digital hand. Deepak Kapoor, please.
Hi, Meera. This is Deepak. I remember your conversations with us in the mid 90s at our study group meetings at RPI, where you
Oh.
talk about the dangers of fascism due to Hindutva, as well as so-called people pushing uh, people, science, technology, and things of that type.
Yeah.
So, I really admire that you had such a forthright sort of and perspective on this thing. Now, my question is basically, what do you see in the future, and also how do we go about steering, India back to a more rational and like sort of a direction where universal values are still upheld, which are being questioned right now.
I sometimes feel very bad that I have two countries and both of them are in such hopeless situation. I really don't know what will pull India back. I think we'll have to go through hell, and it will be hell. Look at what's everyday disasters in India when it comes to issues of religion. The genie is out of the bottle, and I really my problem is with the Nehruvian state and Congress. Really, they were in power. They did not take care of the infrastructure of knowledge at the grassroots level. That would have made a difference, I think. Now the whole education, the NEP is disastrous for rationalism. What they're doing to. So I really don't know. Honestly, I despair about the fate of both these countries. I have no idea.
Thank you, Professor.
Rafat Sahab, if I may pitch
Yeah,
in on
please.
this one that Deepak is asking. Of course, no one has a clear answer to what Deepak is asking. But one thing we have to keep in mind that changes in the society at large have basically, they are primarily political processes. So the fight for state, government, changing the government, no matter how many problems you can cite in the quite faulty liberal or problematic liberal Democrats, still first step has to be that this government, which has through state power has unleashed this reign of unreason over the country, among many other atrocities. First step is political. It is to change the government at center. After that, we will have the chance to criticize what, as we always do, what Congress did and what Congress did not do. And hopefully learning from past, we all, as well as Congress, will do something better, but left on its own does not have the capacity, or there is no chance of left defeating the Hindutva fascists. So one has to bear with the shortcomings of the liberal bourgeois forces, as they are called, or in our jargon they are called. Left will have to join with them, replace this government, and then we can have some handle on the liberal rulers so that they can take better steps. And what Meera is pointing out, the educational, ideological infrastructure can be rebuilt in a better way. So politics is the first step.
Thank you, Dr. Sinha. So next question is from Muhammad Javed, and he is asking two-part question. He is asking Professor Nanda, have you read the series of responses, the work started by Aditya Nigam? If yes, what are your responses, if any? And second question is, while reading the history of the logical positivism and how they were responding to the Nazi excesses. I also saw several parallels with the current rise of unreason, and I also think that maybe we need to go back to the project of logical and empirical positivism. What do you say, Professor Nanda?
Yeah. The positivists had a germ of sense in what they were saying. Of course, their clear demarcation between theory and observation got them in trouble. But their basic point that statements which cannot be verified or falsified, Popper would jump at verified or falsified, are meaningless. That spirit of demanding evidence, of grounding beliefs in evidence needs to be revived. As far as Nigam is concerned, somebody did send me a copy of their I was expecting that they will basically say that, oh, I don't understand the profundity of their points and how they're different from Hindutva. But I was anticipating it, but I haven't read it very seriously. Maybe I should, just to see what others are saying. I'll do it. I believe he's written something on Kafila. I'll go back and look at it.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. So the next one is by the name OnePlus. And the question is, don't you think the Indian right or fascism is better called Brahmical fascism? Good.
Yeah, but it doesn't help to just label. There are many Brahmins who are also rationalists, but it is definitely a Vedantic, Brahminical ideology that. But my point is that's Hinduism is Brahminism. Anyway, no, I wouldn't call them Brahminical fascist or whatever. There's no point creating these kind of fissures because we want to take the Brahmins who are rationalists with us instead of, and but Brahminism does subsume all that's the problem. I mean, the local knowledges which the left claims should be protected, the right will subsume it into dharma. Sanatana dharma ka hi bacche hain wo sab sare. So that's the problem. It's and there is some fact to it. I mean, local knowledges are not autonomous of. I mean, that's the mistake subaltern studies made, that subalterns' minds are autonomous entirely of people in authority. Subaltern minds were always influenced by dharma, by ideologies of religion and God and bhakti. So anyway.
Thank you. Yeah, let's not generalize it.
Right.
So thank you, Professor. The next one is from Victor Ghalib. And he's saying, is India headed into a Hindu theological state since we hear much about the call for a Hindu Rashtra? That's an obvious question, and you must be expecting that.
I think it already is. Indian theocracy will look different from, Iranian theocracy or Saudi Arabian theocracy or the forthcoming American theocracy. It's pretty much on the cards. It'll look different because neither is God considered a monarch-like figure in Hinduism, nor is church so organized. But you can see when your prime minister goes and prays, prime minister is supposed to represent all of India, goes and acts like as a priest in a temple or a devotee in a Hindu temple. What else? When he was sworn in, the Hindu ceremonies that accompanied his swearing in, and the laws that are being changed, India is already already a theocracy, in my opinion. It will never be formally the constitution can accommodate, because it never kept the state and church separate like the First Amendment does. It can accommodate dharmic influences without disturbing the apple cart, and it's doing it.
Okay, thank you, Victor Ghalib Saab. And some comments from Abdul Jabbar Saab, I will invite him in the end. And the another one is from our regular attendee, Srikant Chopra Saab. You try to negate Vivekananda and Aurobindo approach because they borrowed from German vernacular. But all your arguments are 100% borrowed from European definitions, concepts, and narratives. How come your appropriation of these theories is justified, but not the other attempts to synthesize various narrative in colonial period? Most philosophical progress is synthetic, so why not give some credence to the progress made in Indian subcontinent over the last 200 years?
No, I agree 100% that all progress, not just in philosophy, but in sciences, in arts, and we are all hybrids in that sense. Cultures borrow from each other. So that's, and I'm not saying that Vivekananda et al. Only they are the derivative discourse of German. I'm not saying that. Vivekananda was equally well trained and well, he was quite a polymath. I mean, his college education, he was completely immersed in Western philosophical literature of the Enlightenment. I mean, he was familiar with Comte, with Hume, the great skeptic, Mill, Spencer. He was quite familiar with Western. It's only later when he, in fact, in his earlier youth, he wrote pretty skeptically about Hindu metaphysics. He questioned how Hindu sciences are devoted to metaphysical argumentation without looking for the truth of them, looking for evidence. It's only after Paramahansa, after his discipleship with Ramakrishna Paramahansa, is when he turns to Vedanta. And so he is, I'm not at all saying that he could, had he no access to German thinkers or theosophical thinking, or he would not have been what he is. He uses it to provide weight to his arguments. Uses that, they also say that. Paul Deussen admires Bhagavad Gita. Max Muller's argument. So it's not, I'm not at all saying that it is just romanticism. He's combining the two. He's using these authorities, German authorities, to give credence to his ideas.
Thank you. The next one is from Praveen. I see one question from OnePlus, since I have already taken one of those questions. So if time permitting, I will come back to the OnePlus, because I wanted to cover at least one question from each person who's okay. Praveen is, do you believe universal basic education pan-India across all social strata may help steer the discourse away from traditional conservative revisionism? The failure of labor and Dalit movement pan-India attributed to a lack of equitable access to education. It's a good question. Yeah.
I am a firm believer in the power of education. Not everyone will be changed, but without education, it's nearly impossible. But the idea that universal right to education, India passed the law, right to education. My point is, education system, it's not just enough to say the child should have access to education. What kind of education? I mean, if the child is going to go to the Saraswati thingies, or religion should be kept away from public education. That secular education, not just private. And that is one big failing of India, that government aids religious schooling. So the requirement for schooling can be filled by sending a child to any private convent or Guru Shala or whatever. So it's secular education, and that to me is the biggest failing of Congress rule. We poured money into creating people like us who are sitting here in America, and did not do enough for elementary education.
Thank you, Professor. Next question is from Alok Tandon. Your talk is very interesting. There are so many questions. Okay, the next one is from Alok Tandon. Why the left movement in India had to take a back seat and is overpowered by RSS, though both started nearly at the same time in 1925. Do you see any drawbacks in their strategy?
Maybe Ravi can answer this, because you are more in touch with the movements than I am.
Ravi, Dr. Sinha is welcome to answer.
I also happen to know Alok Tandon. So I was expecting this question from him. It's a long story, I mean, in short period of question and answer, that is too much to answer. I usually emphasize that in addition to all the things that left may have done wrong, the cultural civilizational soil of India was not very conducive to left's efforts and ideology. And one of the reasons I think that Mahatma Gandhi became the supreme leader of national movement and not Jawaharlal Nehru or Subhash Chandra Bose had something to do, not, I don't pick up, any complaints about Gandhi personally, what he believed in and what he did not believe in, but only he could have been the leader of Indian masses. Taking the avatar of Mahatma and speaking religious language and of course being secular in the sense that having respect for all religions, all the things that we admire for. But the Indian soil largely determined who will be the leader of national movement. So it does not answer exactly what Alok is asking, but among many factors, the role of our civilizational, social, cultural soil must be factored in the failure of left or in the decline.
I agree with you entirely. And India is one democratic country which has never had any kind of revolution of the mind, of ideas. Just has had no phase where the traditions were put on dock, were questioned. I mean, compared to China, Mao created, of course, there are many problems, but nothing like May 4th happened in India. I mean, Confucian, now they're rediscovering Confucius, but he was demolished, openly berated. When did we ever confront our inheritance and expose it to questions, demand answers? Nothing happened. I mean, that is my problem with Indian nationalism. It right away read science, freedom, democracy into Vedantic spiritualism, into this oneness. Somebody said, what is Vedanta? The spiritual oneness, that thou art that. The God is in you. God is in everything. It's a pantheistic conception. So
Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya Jivo Brahmai Napara. That is the definition of Vedanta.
Good. Thank you once again, and thanks to Jabbar Saab for the patience. Go ahead, please.
So I think I can go, but I see a few digital hands. You want to go through them first?
Okay, I can do that.
Yeah.
Because there are several. And please be brief. Ask a pointed question. And we don't have only 15 minutes left, and there are so many questions lined up. Okay, thank you so much. And let's begin with D. Rao, please.
Yeah,
Which,
hi.
please.
Hi. Professor Nanda, I have been introduced to your work through your essay on Anders Breivik and the Norway massacre
Oh,
and the Hindutva connection.
right.
So my study, my interest and my question is to do with far-right movements and how they have appropriated decolonial language
Right.
to kind of, invert the moral authority of anti-imperial struggles.
Right.
So I don't dispute your arguments about why it is problematic to romanticize indigeneity, etc. But something that decolonial and anti-colonial and post-colonial movements were doing is they were giving us a vocabulary for liberationary and emancipatory politics. So now the far right movements across the world are hijacking this vocabulary and inverting the moral logic of it. So my question to you is, what is the alternative? If we are going to completely dismantle the moral authority of decolonial movements or decolonial vocabularies, this is exactly what the far right is doing as well. So what is the option for us to build solidarities of resistance? Thank you.
I don't think far right is misunderstanding or wrongly appropriating the decolonial argument at all. They are not just. It's like people say, oh, yeah, the left might have meant emancipation, but the idea that you will live the, let me reframe it. My point is, this whole business of cultural authenticity will liberate you, right? That is exactly the argument the far right makes for the white identity groups. Exactly the arguments that have been made for brown people, for Indians, for black people. The right is the far right is using exactly the same argument, only changing the color. They look at liberalism. They look at liberalism as a globalist colonial conspiracy against the ethnic cultures of Europe, and they want to decolonize Europe by throwing out the immigrants and nurturing their own cultural soil. They are doing exactly what decolonial theory wants them to do. There is no misunderstanding. It's not a false appropriation. There's a problem with the idea that decolonization will set you free. Colonization is not the cause of our misery. We learned some good secularism, democracy, freedom, equality. These are ideas that came to us via the West. There's no harm in accepting them, and again, they will be interpreted, applied locally in our local idiom and local tradition. But to condemn them as somehow alien to Indian culture, that is the mistake decolonial theory has made. And now it is being correctly appropriated by, they are not wrong. They understand decolonial theory pretty well. Look, I mean, the French New Right calls itself a like JSI Deepak.
Miss.
They understand what they are talking about.
Thank. Okay, so let's take one more digital hand. Vanshika, then I go back to chat. Vanshika, please.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for this very insightful work. Ma'am, I'm a student, so please correct me if I'm wrong. Ma'am, as your work presents us, as you mentioned in the very beginning, that it's the kind of critique of the academic left, post-colonial, and the subalternist thought that you bring in, ma'am. Then what's the way ahead in kind of intellectual thought? Because we know that there have been a lot of problems with, means there are critique of academic left, that and also it can be seen in the political movements the left have led in India. Like there was less and less of agrarian studies, and many more the grounding of theoretical work was less. So, ma'am, what's the way ahead, in your opinion, in kind of intellectual thought? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, no, that's important. Two things come to mind. If I were to design curricula for school or colleges, I mean, I would a serious study of what happened at what was the Enlightenment. People keep condemning scientific. Enlightenment was putting the scientific revolution into practice in making it. So reassessment of the Enlightenment, a thorough understanding of the rise of rationalism. Where does it come from in the West, and connected to the real roots in our own society. We have had rational voices which are nowhere to be found today in social theory. I mean, now of course people have rediscovered Ambedkar to some extent, but my point is a revival of rationalist thought in our revival of our familiarity with rationalist thought, both in the West and in our own country, and yeah, so that we don't fall for these kind of ideas that Indian nationalism is a colonial construct. No, I mean, so these two things come to mind right away, but maybe Ravi, you can add something to it. But that's a good question. I mean, I need to think of a lot of these issues myself, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
I don't have anything to add. I think Rafat Sahab can move to the next question. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Let's move on, and Rajesh.
No, dobara se do.
Oh, really?
Ah.
Oh my God. Guys, I want to go for this No Kings rally, the No Kings March. So if we can wrap it up.
Yeah, can you afford to give 5 minutes, please?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. Let's be quick, and hopefully I will not entertain many questions. So Rajesh Ramakrishnan Saab, to what extent has the rise of Hindutva been fueled by post-colonial theory? Could we say counterfactually that if post-colonial theory had never come into existence, Hindutva would not have reached where it has reached
Good
today?
point. Yeah, as I said in my last paragraph, that no, Hindutva would have risen to the heights that it has risen. No problem. I don't think in absence of counterfactually, if there was no post-colonialism, it would have still gone on. It did not. It's just given it more respectability, and my problem is it has silenced the opposition. It has delegitimized rationalism, which could have been all these years. I mean, post-colonialism has been around for 40, 50 years now. It started in late 80s. The rationalism in Indian and class analysis, rational Enlightenment thought, except for some handful of Dalit voices here and there, it disappeared from scholarship. So it tuned down, it dampened the resistance to Hindutva.
Thank you. Kaushika, please, be brief. Kaushika?
I'll tell you what, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, just give us 2-3 more minutes and we will be. Go ahead.
It's all right. The things that I wanted to say and ask have been addressed already. So please go to the next person. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much.
I'll give you my email address, and you can all, any questions you have, we can have a longer conversation. And I do better in writing than in speaking. So, we can do that later.
Okay, just one last one. and that is Abdul Jabbar Saab. Please go ahead and.
Well, I think it's given the time. So a remarkable presentation. I kind of, because of that, a lot of the readings on the topic, I just posted everything on the chat box. So thank you very much.
Could you post my email address so that people?
I can.
They will get it.
Yeah,
From me. Yeah,
all
they will
right.
get from
Thank
me.
you. Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
In the interest of time, this
Yeah.
this concludes the question and answer session, and I give back to Dr. Raziuddin for final comment.
Yeah.
Okay, so since we are in an emergency scenario, I could see Meeraji's husband's hand, restlessly saying, "Let's go."
I
So
thought
probably you should go now.
No King's Rally, I thought is starting at 12 and goes on till 2. So it's 1 o'clock already. So we want
Please go. Yeah,
go and raise our voice against the king.
Yeah, and for a few minutes we will engage Ravi Saab, and you may leave now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah,
All right.
maybe we can. No, Ravi Saab, you are not leaving. Maybe you have
Ravi, I will be in India next month. Then maybe we can get together.
Wonderful talk.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yes, Meera, see you in India then. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Yeah. Bye.
Okay, thank you. So let me see if there is any burning question and Ravi Saab can handle it. Thanks. I think most of the.
इसको बंद कैसे करते हैं?
I can remove you then if you.
Don't worry, you just walk away.
Okay.
Just walk away. Later on, you.
Okay, I'll see you later.
Okay, bye. Okay, so recording. Yeah, I don't see any more question. There was one hand raised from Dr. But I hopefully he is still there or not. Dr. Harati. Okay. I don't think so. Radhi bhai, do you have anything to say or ask a question?
I will ask a question.
Okay, ask Ravi sir.
And so in this entire debate of Hindu right and the rationalist left, these scholars like Meera ji or you or anybody else never put any Muslim angle. Like there were plenty of Muslim intellectuals during the same period, right from Sir Sayyid, Iqbal and many others. Obviously, it's a big population and a lot of scholars living side by side at the same time. They also had some input and influence. So do they really come into any kind of understanding or argument or counter argument? I mean, who could be more rationalist than Sir Sayyid? But he still was not totally sold out to West. He rationalized, still he kept his Muslim identity or his values intact. That is truth. Iqbal denounced West, even borrowing so much from West. He denounced West. And he promoted a lot, like what we can say, the intellectuals of the right. Hindutva say many things that he promoted subconsciously, but not in a religious sense. He was never a religious man, but he was very much on the identity of Islam or Muslims, Muslim heritage. So my question is, why the scholars in India, whether they live in West or within India, they always put their values as though it is the only one that matters versus the West or the rational thought. Where is the large population and their leaders' values and their thing? I mean, what they never put or exemplify or reference. Is there that there is nothing that they could do? refer to? I mean, what is there? It is not a communal question. It is a rationalist question that there are so many, why they don't matter.
Well, Rajesh Saab, I cannot speak for other writers or even for Meera. And I haven't published much. I write for small section of the movement, which is mostly internal writing.
Yeah.
And I don't see that. I mean, even the names that come up, the religious or caste or other identities for me don't matter. Okay. So I can cite, Muslim authors and names that we have discussed about, but rather than going on individuals and taking it to a level where somehow Muslim authors are being ignored by even rationalist or leftist or progressive people like us, which I would not say is the case. I see the problem as the following, where I feel I have to educate myself, which is when we define civilizational Indian identity, the problem that we are struggling with, how to define it independent of religious identities. And in that, the ancient part of civilization, that one can incorporate more easily. In the medieval period, which on the one hand was many of the, at least the empire, being ruled by Muslim emperors, and many of the other kings also being Muslims, but equal number or larger number of kings being Hindus. And more importantly, at the grassroots level, at the life of people at large, the rule did not matter as much as, for example, Bhakti Andolan and Sufi movement and the so-called syncretic religious movements, they mattered. Now, in our discourse, in our struggle to find a counter definition of idea of India, counter to Hindutva idea of India, what we are struggling is how to incorporate this medieval period, not because it was ruled by Muslims, but because the politics and the religious life at the ground level was quite disjoint, which has been a peculiar case of the Indian history and Indian society, that people at large have really not bothered so much who rules over them.
Yeah.
And that has been one of the reasons, why, some 10,000 horsemen could come from the, passes, in Himalayas, or 10,000 boatmen could come from the ocean and over a period of time could conquer India. Okay. So that, how do we incorporate in our civilizational definition of idea of India, this kind of disjointed reality where people were being enchanted by bhakti saints and poets, and the rule was from top was for a good period of time Muslim Empire, or Mughal Empire, before that Delhi Sultanate. I could give you a personal anecdote. I asked Professor Harbans Mukhia that could he give a lecture on, is it a well-defined question to ask what is the heritage of cultural heritage of medieval India that lives and that we accept? And he said that, it's a good question, but one will have to work on that. So it's,
yeah, I understand, but it really leads to further questions, or it becomes more complex. Like, when we talk of the time frame where you can talk about Gandhi or the Bengali, intellectuals, nationalist intellectuals, during the same phase, Shibli Nomani, Hali, Sir Sayyid, and Amir Ali, there were many giants who were educated, some of them educated in the West, some Orientalists. They were so rationalist. They were propagating within at least 600 million people, if not the entire India. They were quite known as radicals and rationalists and historians. So when Ashish Nandi or anybody or all these things, all these scholars who argue counter or pro, their impact, even the most rationalist and radical progressive writers movement, flooded with Faiz to Sair to all these big, Sajjad Zahir, who were basically most radical. And they also don't seem to matter when the argument is being made. It is always being made from the thoughts and processes of the larger majority community. Is, is this not a question to be raised, or just it doesn't matter what? I mean, this is
I
a
think it's a very important question. It must be raised, and that tells a lot about what has been the dominant idea or dominant political idea that has been functioning in India for last 150 years. So I mean, Meera has a point when she says that nationalist movements themselves, if I put in my word, they were half saffron. Many of the nationalist leaders,
Yes.
many of the Congress leaders
Yeah,
were.
in Muslim League also, same way. It is replica. Yeah.
Yes. So that is the dominant ideology, and the erudite intellectuals like Ashish Nandi and others, they gain a strength from two sides. Their language and erudition comes from West, even though they are indigenous and nativists, but their language and erudition comes from West, and the support comes from the Indian soil. Indian soil, Indian soil, when people only blame the political forces for communalism, I think they are just blaming the half of the, putting their finger on half of the matter. The communal divide has been there in the soil of India. Otherwise, 500 years ago, Kabir would not write, Hindu कहते हैं राम हमारा मुसलमान रहमाना आपस में दो लड़े मरत है मरम न को जाना. So आपस में दो लड़े मरत है, that was Kabir 500 years ago. Something must be happening. So there is the Hindu-Muslim divide is there in the soil. And to uproot that, or to give the responsibility to the leftists that why did not they uproot is unfair to the leftists.
So, okay, with this we end because now it is extended too much. And keep in mind that this could be a very important theme for a future session.
Raji Sahab, our good friend Professor Akhilesh Laktakia wants to say something. Just give him, 2 minutes.
Give me a second. Yes. Ravi, I will go a little bit further than you.
Yes, sir.
My feeling is that Muslims are not regarded as authentic Indians.
But by certain
I'll say that flat out.
I mean, by certain quarters. Are you saying that by all?
Let me put it this way. Whenever I scratch an Indian Hindu, of course, from the name only, I can say that.
Yes.
I find there is this deep sense of India equals Hindu.
Yeah.
Even in the mind of liberals and progressives?
Particularly in the minds of liberals.
Sir, can you give a talk on this?
Particularly. I'll tell you what, somebody, by the way, I don't know if enough people know me, but I'm not married to an Indian. Okay. And I say that because
not Indian.
My wife is not.
Oh, foreigner. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And she's not Hindu either, for that matter.
Razi bhai, this is a very big shock for you.
What do you mean?
But thought we are equal partners.
But I should say. So I have perspectives.
Yes.
I have perspectives that are different because I see other viewpoints as well.
Sure.
Simply Indian Hindu or Indian Muslim or Indian American. Okay, I see other viewpoints as well. Okay, and I think you can trace racism of any kind to a very simple question. If your daughter brings home a man romantically inclined, of course, who is not of your group, would you welcome that person? If you, I find that is the acid test of humanity.
Yes, of course.
I did.
Okay.
I did
And
welcome.
by that test, most Indians.
Yeah, but for most it is not. Yes.
So I did welcome my son-in-law as a
That's good,
Texan.
but it is not welcome by most. Yes, the question is not particular cases. The question in general. Yeah.
No, I understand that. I just wanted to
Sir,
my
we are
personal
getting
perspective on that.
Yeah,
Okay, let Akhilesh Saab expand further, because this is something I wanted to hear.
Well, I really can't say too many things here. All I can say is that when I first came to this country, United States, and that was 46 years ago, I was a young man, 22 years old.
You have to introduce also, sir, from which background you came, where you are, and what is your discipline. Because then we can understand better.
Yes, Sahab, he is also from BHU.
Oh my God. Well, I am a PhD from BHU.
I am not a PhD from BHU.
Yeah, I am connected to BHU.
I have a DSc from
BHU is enough.
And you are from where? BHU? You did what?
Yeah, I went to IIT. Well, what was then, what later became IIT BHU.
Yeah.
And then I went to University of Utah, where I graduated with a PhD in electrical engineering. And for the last 43 years nearly, I've been at Penn State.
Okay. So not very far. Not very far.
Yeah. So what I noticed was when I first came to Utah, there were very few Indian families, just about, I think, 65 families in the entire Salt Lake Valley. And they used to get together and all that. And I was, as a 22-year-old young man, the darling of all the bhabis.
Okay.
Okay. You can guess why. Okay.
Yeah, of course.
But
okay.
But the moment they came to know about 3 years later that my beloved was not one like them, there was an immediate retrenchment of affections. Okay. And I must say I have remained from that time, what should I say? My affections with Indians have been alienated.
Okay.
Okay, all right. So it's only very few that I meet in a university setting. But even in the university setting, I find that Indians become a bit more open when their own daughters insist on marrying a non-Indian. Even then, I'm talking about Hindus now, they say, yes, he is Christian or he's European American or something like that. That's okay, so long as he's not Muslim. Yes,
Rafat, you raised the question. You have to listen this.
Yes, and this is what tells me.
It is okay. Jew, Christian, Buddhist, anything.
Jew is okay. Christian is okay.
Non-Muslim.
Muslim, no.
Even if the daughter lives in America.
Even if the daughter lives in America.
What is
even
this?
If the father is a professor or the mother, I don't know any as
what
such.
Is this?
But father is a professor at a major American university.
So what is this deep thing that everybody else is okay except this? What is that? Why?
Because I think in the end, the issue is of thinking about your progeny. By the way, they will not even welcome a Muslim daughter-in-law. Let me say that too. Although I haven't come across a specific instance of that. Okay. But the question is of progeny.
So Akhilesh, same is true for Muslims. They don't want to. Same is true because they are 1.2 billion people. Right. Probably they don't want to marry their daughters with Hindu.
Yeah, but
they would prefer, I would very honestly saying, they would prefer that they can marry with a Christian, with a Jew, or with anyone else, but not a Hindu.
No.
At least in the US, I can very bluntly say that.
But the difference, Rafat, is very also hurting to the other side. That the Muslims, even in the very, very modern Muslims also, it's not uncommon in America that you will see a Hindu boy converting to Islam and marrying a Muslim girl. It is not very uncommon. Or even in the, of course, boy or girl, both, the insistence or a tradition of Muslims casually saying to the non-Muslim lover that, yeah, we are going to marry, but you have to convert. So this is one thing that is very common, and it is happening here, everywhere.
So from that perspective, and please don't, I would say,
except the hardcore
both Hinduism and Islam are cults.
The cults. Well,
They're not.
yes,
They are not religions.
Yeah,
They're
well,
not dharma.
they are
Cults.
Islam is very much a religion, but the problem is even the very modern one, except the atheist or communist, few Muslim born in Muslim families, but they have no religion really. They don't practice. They don't have any problem in marrying anybody. Say like Irfan Habib Saab's daughter, okay? So Irfan Habib Saab doesn't give a damn to, I mean, or those kind. Very famous cases, Advocate Shekhar Saran, he was the brother-in-law of communist leader of Allahabad at that time. What is the name? I forgot. So those are minor percentages. Great percentages, this is thing. Even in the Hindus communities also, they will insist on conversion. That is also true. I have seen it. I've seen it.
Okay, so Razi bhai, I
This
have
is
to
getting
move on. I have to
this is
go
getting
somewhere.
in a very religious thing, but I was not talking
But
about.
thank you, Akhilesh Saab, for being so open and blunt.
So we
I
can,
appreciate
yeah.
that. I
My,
certainly do.
my,
And at least because I always love to hear the other side, which people are not really open, and they never tell you what are the drawbacks of other person. They will just tell to the third person, but not the person who has drawbacks. So I really like that. Thank you so much. I have to move on. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And now it's getting quite late.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, we will come on this theme, but not in a very personal manner.